Hockey romances like Heated Rivalry have been bringing new fans to hockey for a very long time. But with the TV show Heated Rivalry, as well as the books that it's based on, we have seen one of the biggest crossovers of new fans getting interested in hockey and really expanding outside of just the romance of the show. And a lot of that is because of how well the hockey informs the romance and how impossible it would be for Heated Rivalry to exist if both Rachel Reed and Jacob Tierney didn't have a deep understanding and love for hockey, and weave so much of it into the romance between Shane and Ilya, as well as Scott and Kip, which is why I have been doing this special edition of The Romance of Sports. The Romance of Sports is the series where I break down sports media, whether it is TV shows, movies, or books, or any other pieces of media, like a webcomic perhaps, that features sports as a setting or part of the plot, and explain how all of that sport knowledge really affects the relationships in that piece of media. And because Heated Rivalry has personally been taking over my life, as it has many of yours, we have been doing a sports romance breakdown for every single episode back to back. This video will be breaking down episode 5, so if this is the first time you're seeing me or the sports romance series, first of all, hi, I'm Marissa, and this channel is all about making sports more accessible to people who feel left out of them. And second of all, if you do want to go episode by episode, remember that there are 4 other episodes of this series already. And whether you watch those now or after you finish this episode, just know that, of course, this is going to be breaking down just episode 5 of Heated Rivalry. So with all of that being said, let's dive in, because not only are episodes 5 and 6 some of the biggest stretches of the romance itself, and 2 of my favorite episodes in the series, it also has some of the most impactful hockey in the series itself. So we open this episode with Shane and Rose still together. And as unhappy as we as the viewers know Shane may be in this relationship from this awkward morning after, we also get Ilya continuing to only see Shane through Instagram comments and gossip blogs. As Ilya is in the airport with his team, we also see him scrolling through a gossip blog called Trois Mois. Now this did make me laugh specifically because this was obviously sort of a joke around Dumois, the gossip blog, but it was also interesting because Dumois also ended up really upsetting the cast of this show. I personally do think that celebrity gossip blogs like Dumois can cross the line sometimes, and we all get a little bit too comfortable with the way that we are invading people's privacy from time to time. But also in the context of the show and Ilya and Shane's relationship, it's interesting to remember that even though they have each other's phone numbers, they're also able to, while they're not speaking to each other, access a lot of information about each other. Again, we're reminded that Shane is not only one of the most famous players in the league, probably on par with Ilya himself, but we're also reminded how every move that he would make, whether it was romantic or not, would be heavily followed. The fact that he's dating Rose Landry, one of the most famous movie stars in this kind of universe, also makes it a lot easier for Ilya to keep tabs on him. But it also means that if you were trying to kind of move on from this guy, you're certainly going to see him literally everywhere, and you're also going to be reminded that he's dating a movie star. So much of their relationship and so much of how they would kind of interact with each other while they're not actually directly speaking, and even when they are directly speaking, since these guys don't really know how to express their emotions, and that is why we are in the situation that we are in right now, would be kind of information that they're getting third party. And there's something really interesting about the way that they observe each other evolving throughout this series and throughout their relationship. Before they ever meet, they would have been tracking each other through their juniors' careers, looking at each other as threats, as competition, and as the person that they're expecting to go up against throughout every part of their professional career. And of course, there's a little bit of intrigue before they meet each other. Then when it comes to World Juniors, they're sort of only meeting once a year, and knowing both of them as characters, we know that they would have been tracking each other through scouting reports and trying to figure out how close they were to beating the other. And also, of course, a little bit of intrigue, as we know that it started very early on with them. Then as they're going through their relationship and we're watching it, all of the gaps that they would be spending apart from each other, they would continue to be able to see each other through sort of this online tracking. The level of celebrity that they have, which we've talked about in this series a number of times, makes them both impossible to escape, but also in this scenario makes it pretty easy to kind of keep them in your pocket. We constantly see this commercial version of Shane sort of haunt the episodes, even the ones with Scott and Kip, where we're seeing him film all of these endorsements, and then we're seeing those commercials run while Ilya's trying to ignore him in the gym, or in the background while Kip's watching Scott's games, or now while Ilya's sitting in the airport reading all of these gossip blogs. And the thing that really strikes me when we see either of them sort of observing each other from behind the screen is until later in this episode, so much of it is done with almost like a desire to get every crumb they can. And watching Ilya do this is also a reminder of how impossible it would be to get over a breakup like this, where you're having a secret relationship with your arch rival, and then you break up and he starts dating a movie star kind of by your suggestion. It would be impossible for either of them to open their phones and see anything other than the other guy. And I think when you look at this relationship and how long it spans, one of the things about it that obviously kind of pushes them over the edge is, how are we still thinking about each other? But also, to me, the thing about it is, how could you possibly not be? No matter where Ilya goes, there's always going to be a question and a kind of ghost of Shane Hollander. And no matter how hard Shane tries to find a different life for himself that isn't authentic to who he is, Ilya will always be there as a reminder reminder of a time that he was happier, which is essentially the reminder that he gets when he's talking with Rose that allows him to kind of make those changes. But the biggest piece of hockey that hangs over this entire episode is the All-Star Game. Now, we've talked a little bit about the All-Star Game before, but as a refresher, the All-Star Game happens in hockey every season except the seasons where we have an Olympic break like we did for 2026. And this is a time where fans are voting people in as All-Stars, and we see sort of the best and fan favorites on the ice for a weekend. There are skills competitions as well as an All-Star Game, so plenty of times for these guys to be competitive with each other. Now, at the beginning of this episode, we get another one of those man-in-the-creased info dumps that are pretty important. We get a couple of things set up. One, the league has gone with East versus West, which they had been avoiding previously. And that's because Shane and Ilya are actually in the same division, which means that if the league wanted to kind of play at their rivalry, they couldn't do a standard East versus West competition. That's why earlier in the season, when we see their first All-Star Game, they actually do North America versus Europe. And that is intentional so that they can kind of play these two guys against each other and hype up the sort of big narrative of the league. But now we're seeing that for 2017, they're going with East versus West, which means that not only will Ilya and Shane be on the same team, but so will Scott Hunter. All of them would be on the East team, which means that for the West team, it's about to be a bloodbath. Now, one of the other things that they point out in this Man in the Crease episode when they first start is that fans are excited to see Ilya and Shane not only on the same team, but potentially on the same line. And if they do show up on the same line, the question is which one of them would move to wing and who would center who. Now, this is something that we hear a lot throughout the episode. We also see Svetlana bring this up. And what this basically means is that Ilya and Shane actually play the same position. They both play center on their teams, which is why it was so easy to pit them against each other for this rivalry. And when we're talking about hockey, there are 5 skaters and 1 goalie per team on the ice at a time. Those skaters are broken up into 2 different groups. There are 3 people that make up your forward line, and so that's your center, your right wing, and your left wing. And those players are going to be your faster skaters and your more offensive players. Whereas the other 2 skaters on the ice are your defensive players. So Ilya and Shane both play center. And for them to be able to play on the same line, one of them would have to play right or left wing. If we were talking about them being on the same team long term, you know, if for some reason they were to end up on the same team in something other than an exhibition match, you would most likely see both of them stay at center. One of them would stay on the first line and the other would be on the second line, which would be a pretty impossible offense to beat. Because in hockey, we have what's called line changes. And that's that throughout the game, every player does what's called a shift. That's the amount of time that they're on the ice before they come off the ice to get a break. And that can be somewhere between 30 seconds and 45 seconds, or even longer than that. But if you're getting over that 45-second mark, it's usually a little bit long on the ice. That's why you see players jumping over the boards back and forth throughout the game, because we're trying to put the fastest and most rested players on the ice at all times. So long term, if you were to have 2 star centers on your team, there would be a huge advantage in being able to consistently have a star center on the ice as you're doing those line changes, which does not give the other team any moment to really let up. Having 2 back-to-back strong shifts with 2 very, very strong centers would essentially give their team an incredible offensive advantage. And in a real regular season game, if they were both on the same team, the time that you would see them on the ice at the same time would typically be in the power play, which is when the other team commits a penalty and we put that penalty maker in timeout. Once that happens, the other team goes on what's called a power play. So while the other team is playing shorthanded and has 4 players or less, Ilya and Shane's theoretical team that we might just call Ottawa for the sake of it would have 5 players on the ice to the other team's 4. At that time, teams do kind of mix up their lines because they have a different advantage with less people that they have to play against. So that's where you would typically see Ilya and Shane on the ice at the same time if it were a regular season situation. However, when we're talking about something fun like an all-star game, one of them could shift their position to a right wing or a left wing while the other stays at center so that we can have the excitement of seeing them on the ice at the same time. And all of that would be really fun to watch as a fan. Once these rosters are announced and we know that we're going to see Ilya and Shane, these massive rivals, on the ice for the same side, all of the chatter of whether or not you might actually literally get to see them on the ice at the same time, passing pucks back and forth and trying to score, would be a huge burst and a huge reason that people would want to watch the All-Star Game. The NHL and other leagues that do these All-Star Games are doing them so there's something fun and exciting to tune into and a reason to start kind of paying attention if maybe you tuned out throughout the season. And all of the chatter around them being on the same team for the first time would have been a really big marketing aspect. So the moment that this news sort of hits the league and the fandom, it's going to be a huge conversation the same way that we're seeing it in this podcast. But the other factor that's brought into the podcast and would have been a part of the conversation as well is the fact that Scott Hunter will also be on this East team. The podcast says who's centering who in reference to Ilya and Shane, which does sound, you know, a little suggestive, but I guess technically probably is how you would say it. And they say, and where does Scott Hunter fit into the mix? Now, just from kind of the gameplay footage that we see in Scott and Kip's episode 3, we actually know that Scott is a right wing. It's shown in one of the graphics of the New York game versus San Francisco that Kip's watching in the bar, where they show his stats and it says RW, which stands for right wing, and then they show that he took 6 shots, made 2 goals, had 1 assist, and at that point in the game had 11 minutes and 30 seconds of ice time, meaning that on active shifts he had been on the ice for 11 minutes and 30 seconds, which was implying that he had kind of been having a great game. And the fact that Scott was a right wing means that they could have played all together if they wanted. If either Shane or Ilya was willing to move to wing, which we ultimately find out that Ilya does, we could have had Scott, Ilya, and Shane on the same line and no one would have known what they had in common. But we also get a reminder of how much everybody doesn't believe in Scott Hunter's ability to play hockey. Because they say, speaking of Scott Hunter, will he continue the hot streak that he's been on, or will he crash and burn the way he does every season? Now, I will say, frankly, this is the kind of heat that I was talking about when we talked about podcasts needing to be meaner in this universe back in episode 3. There is something hilarious about how much this podcast is against Scott Hunter, and I'm starting to wonder if Ilya Rozanov, famous dinosaur hater, is producing this podcast. There is something very funny about this sort of like vendetta that this podcast has against Scott. We hear Man in the Crease really going through all of Scott's troubles during episode 3 when he's first running and we're introduced to him in this way. And now we're seeing that even though he's doing a lot better and years have passed, given the fact that this episode is now set 3 years after episode 3, all of the events in episode 3 happen in 2014, 4 months before the Olympics, and this episode is taking place in 2017. There is something very funny to me about this Man in the Crease podcast continuing to go back to Scott Hunter and being like, God, I hate that guy. There's no way he's gonna keep playing good hockey. He sucks. When you realize that it's been 3 years since Scott met Kip, in theory, there's a lot of like lore that you could beat around this podcast, because I'm starting to wonder if these guys on this Man in the Crease podcast are actually like long-suffering New York Admirals fans, because they're going through it in 2014, and then we know that Scott ends up playing a lot better after that. He takes home a gold medal from the Olympics, he's going to the All-Star game, he's trying to do his best, but we also know that he hasn't won any of the cups in the in-between years, because we've been watching Ilya and Shane win them. So throughout this long break that we have between episode 3 and now, there is this long-suffering hockey podcaster that's like in his room and he's like, man, this is gonna be our year, this is the year, we're gonna do it, we're not gonna do it. He's gonna crash and burn like he always does. I guess personally I have some questions about the lore behind the Man in the Crease podcast. Who hurt you and why was it Scott Hunter? So many a podcast is probably talking about this, but overall we know that the biggest story in the MLH right now is the fact that we're going into this All-Star game and that we're going to see Ilya and Shane on the same side for the very first time. And people are excited to see what this looks like. And that's the news cycle that would be going on when Shane and Rose go to have dinner together. Now, I think this is one of the most beautiful scenes in this show. We talk a lot about the phone call sequence in that scene and how great and powerful it is, and that's in this same episode. But I also think that Hudson Williams' performance as Shane in this dinner sequence is genuinely some of the best acting in the show as well. And I think we don't talk about this sequence enough because Shane is having such a quiet reaction to this, but you can see both the pain and the love and realization in his eyes. And one thing I did want to point out from the hockey context of this in this conversation with Rose is that Rose asks Shane if there are any out gay hockey players. And the truth of that question is that the NHL is the only major North American league to have no out gay players either active or retired. Every other major North American league has had a player come out either retired or active. And when she asked that question, it actually shines a light not only just on how big of a deal it would be, but how much less of support we see in the NHL compared to other leagues, which is really not that much to begin with. I thought it was a really great moment to point it out in this show because they do such a great job of not making this a tragedy. This is actually a happily ever after. Neither of our main characters die. There's no horrible kind of oncoming train that's dealing with this. There's no genuine tragedy in this, but it's really a happy and quiet love story and a happy and loud love story for Scott and Kip. But it is a good reminder here, and we do later get another reminder of it with Scott's speech, that when we look at the NHL, they do not have a precedent for this. Not just for a player coming out, but of course for the players to be coming out together as a relationship. This scene is done so well, and that is the biggest piece of hockey context that comes out of it. But one of my favorite filmmaking aspects that comes out of this is that they actually used different coverage in Shane's memories of the moments that he was with Ilya as he's talking to Rose and realizing how much he feels for him. If you go back to the episodes of the moments that he's remembering, they're not the same shots that we saw in reality. And Shane remembers things a little bit softer and a little bit more romantic than we actually saw them happen. And I loved that choice as a TV, as a filmmaking choice. It was such a beautiful way to show Shane not only really starting to accept himself and to say it out loud for the first time, but also to show us how he looks back on his moments with Ilya and how much more tender and beautiful he remembers them to be as he's starting to accept who he is for himself. And then one last thing I really loved from the conversation with Shane and Rose is how it ends when they're leaving. There's this really almost throwaway line where Rose is saying that they should stay best friends, and Shane is like, yes, I would like that. No, I don't have someone to talk to about things. But then Rose says, you're secretly one of the funniest people I know. know. And Shane replies and says, you don't have to keep that a secret, and she says that she'll tell everyone. The writing of this show is so impeccably good. And of course, it's not just the hockey of it, though I really do think that the hockey of this show and how well it's done really does kind of factor into why this show has been so successful and so well done, because every moment of it and every aspect of their relationship really does play into it and really does come from a place of extreme knowledge. But also little moments like this where we hear other people reflect the opposite of what Ilya tells Shane, especially with someone like Rose, who Shane is looking at and is saying like, this is my perfect match on paper. Last episode with the tuna melts, one of the funniest kind of throwaway lines was after Shane makes the buffalo joke that we've talked about so much. Ilya says, and people say you aren't funny. They also say you're boring. And then he says, who says that? And he says, me. There are so many little small reflective moments in this show where we see Shane kind of up against someone who should be his perfect match, but we see this sort of almost opposite reflection of it. Shane's perfect match isn't someone who compliments him and tells him how great he is. He kind of gets that from pretty much everyone in his life. Shane's perfect match is someone who teases him even when he's paying him a compliment. Ilya is a sort of comedian whose best compliment is not an actual laugh at another comedian's joke, but a genuine that's funny without a hint of laughter. And I think that those are the moments that are so fun with Shane, because we talk a lot about Shane's autism and his inability to read other social cues. But when it comes to sarcasm, he does read that in Ilya. Ilya is actually quite good at teasing and communicating that with Shane, and Shane recognizes it, and it's half the fun. Because it is this competitive edge, this competitive back and forth that Shane and Ilya have that Shane craves, that someone like Rose wouldn't be able to offer him. So we start with the hype of All-Star Weekend, knowing that it's coming up. Then we go through this conversation of Rose where it does become clear that Shane knows that he would still want to keep this a secret and still feels like he has to. And that, of course, no one else is out. This is not something that he would be the second person to do until later. And we see Shane visibly make up his mind to do something about this and go into All-Star Weekend. Now, looking at how the NHL season works when it comes to the scheduling, if you're in the same division as another team, you're typically going to see them 3 to 4 times a season. A regular season is 82 games, and then you have the playoffs when you would be seeing your division rivals again. And then you have this sort of bonus of the All-Star game, which is where we know we'll see Shane and Ilya next. But in all this time, we know that Ilya has only been seeing Shane through news alerts. And we know that Ilya has a very different view of what he expects from Shane when they get there. So then we jump back to Ilya in Boston and his time with Svetlana. And again, we're back to my hockey queen, who I love so much. And because of that, we get Ilya and Svetlana in bed together watching hockey, and Svetlana going on a hockey rant that is very, very fun. And again, like we frequently do with Svetlana, we get this big dump of hockey knowledge. So let's go through a little bit of it. In the game that they're watching, Svetlana is complaining about the way that they're running the power play. Like we discussed a little bit earlier, a power play is what happens when the other team commits a penalty. They have one guy who goes into the box, and it's typically going to be a 2-minute or a 5-minute penalty. And for that amount of time that's on the clock, they play with one less man on the ice. That means that your team is on what's called a power play. And so when Svetlana is complaining about the power play, she's complaining about the players that they're putting on the ice for the power play unit. The player that she's specifically complaining about is replacing a Russian player, and this player is Canadian. She talks about him wasting 1.5 minutes of the man advantage, meaning that this one player she feels that should be replaced with the Russian player from their team has essentially just run time off the clock without being able to push them towards a goal. Now, another thing that's relevant to know about a power play is that if the clock runs out and you don't score, the other team has done what's called a penalty kill. The guy that was in the penalty box comes back out, their group on the ice returns to full strength, and we go back around the game the way we always do, having missed a chance to score. However, if your team does score on the power play, as long as it's not a 5-minute major, the penalty actually ends when that team scores. So most likely, based on the context clues we have here, this was most likely a 2-minute penalty for something minor like tripping or slashing. And as Svetlana complains about this player, Ilya says he'll let him know at All-Star Weekend because he had been voted there. So then we get a little bit of conversation about All-Star Weekend. We talk about how players are voted in by the fans, and of course Svetlana brings up the fact that Ilya and Shane will be on the same team. I have to be honest with you, I do feel like Svetlana had this figured out way before she says anything about it, because she's constantly like, isn't that guy cute? Isn't he cute? Don't you think he's cute? Don't you think he plays hockey so well? What's going on there? Who's Jane? But also, as like the biggest hockey fan ever, Svetlana is also very excited about the idea of Shane and Ilya on the same team. And then she also brings up this conversation about who would center who. We've already kind of talked about what that means and what those positions are, but when she suggests that Ilya can play wing, there's something very fun about that. One, it suggests that Ilya is a pretty dynamic player in a way that she's almost saying Shane isn't, because Ilya says that he doesn't think Shane could play wing, and she says probably not, but you can, suggesting that Ilya has the ability to be a little bit more adaptable than Shane does on the ice. Though some people would take it as Shane being the stronger center and Ilya being moved. Again, this is an exhibition game. It's just an all-star game. It wouldn't be that big of a deal to kind of move these guys around. And there's something very fun and rich about his relationship with Svetlana and the fact that she can talk about his game in this way. And the conversation about who centers who and Ilya ultimately being the one to move out of his position into a complementary one to Shane is that for fans of the long game, or even if you just know how the series ends and this whole conversation about how their plan is going to work moving forward, it also uses hockey to highlight a very specific part of Ilya's character. Ilya is the one to move out of his position into a complementary one towards Shane. Ilya and Shane are both very comfortable and very strong at this one specific thing that they do against each other. They both play center and they both lead their teams as captains. When it comes to the first time that they have a chance to play together, Ilya is the one who has the ability and the willingness to adapt his game to move over into a different position to allow Shane to fit into his life the way that Shane wants to continue moving forward. For the All-Star game, Shane doesn't change out of his normal position. He stays at center, he keeps the captaincy, and he remains the crowd favorite. Meanwhile, Ilya shifts over to a different position. He ends up with an A on his chest for alternate captain while Shane gets to keep the C. And Ilya is willing to adapt his game so that they can make something pretty magical together. All of which is this really nice way of folding hockey into one of Ilya's main character traits, which is this willingness to adapt for the people that he loves around him. This willingness to change something core about himself in order to make sure that everyone around him that he loves is comfortable. And I stress the people that he loves because obviously he's a famous rage baiter and happy to make everyone uncomfortable that he doesn't care for. But with this All-Star Weekend portion in 2017 in Tampa, with so many people from the Man in the Crease podcast to Svetlana talking about who's going to center who's going to make the adjustment, it almost feels inevitable that of course it would be Ilya to do that. Of course it would be Ilya being willing to change something, being willing to take less in order to have the more of being together with Shane. And it's even more well done and enjoyable when you look at the two different forces that are talking about this. You have the outside force of the Man in the Crease podcast talking about it as though it's a competition. Shane and Ilya, these massive long-term rivals, are going to be on the same team for the first time. And maybe we'll even see them put on the same line, but who's going to center who? And then you have someone who knows Ilya so well and knows the game so well that brings it up again in a very intimate space with Ilya. Svetlana, who knows everything about hockey and knows everything about Ilya, automatically says, of course you'll move to the other position. Of course you'll shift over to wing. And of course it ends up working out well. When we actually get to the All-Star game, we see that Ilya moves to a wing slot, and that's where we get this beautiful moment of them skating well, keeping up with each other, passing, and of course scoring a goal. And of course we get that kind of helmet kiss in that moment as well. But it's another one of these small things where we see how well done the hockey is in this show, and how much the understanding of hockey and the layering of it into their characters really enhances every piece of this romance, not only in the moment, but actually in the future of where this story is going. And honestly, every time we do these episodes, I just remember how good the writing is and how jealous I am of this TV show as a whole. So then of course we get to All-Star Weekend itself. Shane and Ilya meet back up at the bar for the first time for the weekend, and this is where we have new and improved confident Shane who's on a mission. But we also get a couple of really fun moments in this interaction that are even better with hockey context. Of course we have Carter Vaughn interrupting their conversation, throwing an arm over both of them and talking about how they need to be separated because of their rivalry. And again, it's a reminder that no matter where they go, no matter how long they've been in love with each other, no matter how much they kind of try to appear as friends, they're never going to be able to have a moment that appears as civil in public without someone having something to say about it. I really enjoyed having Carter Vaughn kind of pop their bubble because it's a reminder that no matter where they go, they're constantly going to have people saying, oh my god, look, these two guys aren't punching each other in the face. Isn't that crazy? And you get Shane and Ilya acknowledging that. Shane says, I feel like we're going to get a lot of that this weekend, and Ilya says they should let us get to know each other. Who knows what we might have in common. But it is this sort of like quiet, bitter moment of recognizing that even if they just wanted to appear civil while they're on the same team at All-Star Weekend, people are still going to be making jokes about the fact that they hate each other. This arch rival narrative that has been going on since they were 17 years old is not going to go anywhere, even if they literally just wanted to be friends publicly. And that's something that's super relevant here. Understanding that if Shane or Ilya were having any sort of kind of secret relationship with pretty much anyone else in the league, they could sit next to each other at a bar at All-Star Weekend and very quietly kind of enjoy themselves without it being an issue. But these guys have been the narrative of the league so much so that even the idea of having an East versus West All-Star game has been held out for most of their careers, as implied by the narrative here, because of the fact that the league wants to continue capitalizing on their rivalry. The fact that these two guys would be on the same team for an exhibition match at All-Star Weekend is like the core narrative of this entire All-Star marketing strategy. So it is so much more than just two players having a secret relationship together. It is not only two guys from rival teams, but two guys guys who are the stars and saviors of those rival teams. The idea of them even just sitting next to each other and drinking a beer at a public bar, where the rest of their teammates are for the weekend for an exhibition silly match, still results in a loud conversation of get a load of these two guys. And that's sort of the ghost that's like haunting the rest of this conversation. Another fun moment in this conversation is of course Shane revealing that he got a stylist. And it's not only fun because we get to see Ilya kind of dance around the landmine of figuring out whether or not that's because of Rose or for some other reason, but also because if you don't follow the NHL, you may not realize that the NHL actually had a pretty strict dress code up until this season. Up until literally the start of the 2025-2026 season, NHL players had to wear a suit to their games. Now they're able to wear whatever they want, and while there is not a lot of good style in the NHL, that is okay. Sometimes you get a good fun moment. A couple of the guys do know how to dress themselves, and otherwise it's, I kind of miss the suits. But that also means that this idea of Shane getting a stylist is for something outside of just showing up to games and going home. Shane, for the first time, would be concerned with what he looks like outside of hockey. This idea of having a stylist and looking good and dressing like he's not going to the gym shows that he's looking at his appearance outside of the moments where he's being told exactly what he has to wear. He wears gym clothes to go to the gym, he wears gym clothes to hockey practice, he wears a suit to the game, and he heads home in gym clothes most likely. There's this small character moment peeking out of all of the other moments that he might want to be seen and might want to look good when he's doing so. And of course, we have this small moment of it being implied that Ilya has better style than he does. And then we get a couple of other small moments in this montage before we get into the actual hotel room conversation. Ilya plays with some of the kids in the pool who even manage to highlight their rivalry again. Ilya asks one of the kids if they know who Shane is, and they say he's the best player in the NHL. And of course, these are kids of other players that are there for All-Star Weekend, but it's still fun to remember that even kids, even children of the NHL players know how much these guys are supposed to hate each other. We get the quick montage of them on ice, of seeing Shane and Ilya kind of on the same line, Ilya moving to that wing position. We see how well they move on the ice together, how they're able to pass, the guys are just there when they're supposed to be there, the stick tap calling for the puck, and of course the goal, and of course the kiss. I do love this moment because Ilya pushes a boundary here with flirtation. So much of their flirtation in this situation up until the hotel room is public in a way that it never has been before. Once Ilya confirmed that Rose Landry was no longer in the picture, there is this space where we see him very publicly kind of taking risks. Again, if you've read The Long Game, I do think it sort of points to other moments that we're going to see later and sort of internal struggles for Ilya, but also in this context, one of the other things that it highlights is how much people are not guessing that Ilya and Shane are romantic together. How much it's not even a thing that would cross their mind to panic about. Ilya kisses Shane on the helmet after they score that goal, and that's actually a pretty normal way of celebrating in the NHL. If we just look at my team, even at the end of the game the other night when we had a shutout, Quentin Byfield is smooching our goalie at the end for a good game. In general, physical affection in sports is actually pretty normal. And so there are these kind of boundaries and lines where Ilya could sneak a public kind of display of affection and make it look like a celebration. The problem, of course, would be if anyone were to actually find out what was going on. So let's talk about this hotel room scene, the confession of feelings, and sort of the crux of their problem. When Shane does go over to Ilya's hotel room to talk to him about how he's feeling and to sort of confront him, and we do get this push and pull of Ilya basically kind of trying to protect his heart. This moment where the last time Ilya tried to be vulnerable, Shane completely freaked out, and now Ilya has sort of returned to his same emotional state. Laugh it off, make jokes, and when all else fails, be a little mean. But one of the biggest parts of this conversation when we're talking about the hockey context of this is when Shane says being gay is one thing, sleeping with your arch rival is a completely different thing. That really is the core issue here, and Ilya brushes it off by saying it's why it's a secret. But the point of the whole situation is it's not just like Rose asked at the beginning of this episode. Are there any out gay hockey players? If Shane were to come out individually, it would be one thing and it would shock the league. But for Shane and Ilya to be together publicly would be something that would be completely unfathomable to the league and to the fans. Not only would it be surprising, these guys are supposed to be the biggest rivals in like the history of the modern MLH. They are constantly pitted against each other. They have been since they were 17 years old. And the second it comes out that they were actually together this entire time, or even that they were just together now and they didn't talk about the history of their relationship, every time they're on the ice, someone would be wondering, are they letting the other one win? Are they letting their relationship affect the way that they play hockey? Are they not checking the guy into the boards? Are they not playing aggressive hockey because of this? Are they letting someone win? Are they falling down intentionally? And then people would be going through the entire history of their career, looking back at every moment, every highlight, every win, every loss, and asking what was really the intention behind that. Were they really playing their best game, or were they letting the other person win? There is a mountain of speculation that comes out of the two of these guys being known to be together. And not only that, you have this anger and destruction of these fans. Remember that earlier this season, during one of the games in the locker room, we literally talk about the fact that fans in Montreal and Boston actively burn effigies of Shane and Ilya in front of their stadiums before games. These fan bases would not take lightly to the idea that you are literally sleeping with the enemy. Hockey fans are very, very intense, just like any other sport. And so there's a completely different element to Shane and Ilya's relationship than there is to Scott and Kip's. Even if Shane and Ilya were to be known to be together publicly after they retired, their entire legacy would then become this scrutinized conversation. What was the truth behind every time they stepped on the ice together? And this would go even further than just the times that they were on the ice together. There would be conversations about whether or not they individually threw games throughout the regular season to work on the points and the rankings for their opponent. And that's what's sitting behind Shane saying being gay is one thing, being with your arch rival is a complete different thing. Because it is. And all of that expectation, all of that understanding, that's what's weighing on this conversation on top of everything else. And it's also the sort of eventuality that they understand exists when they both essentially decide that it's worth trying anyway. Even though in this conversation we still see Ilya holding back. He brings up his mother but doesn't give any details and kind of brushes it off. He brings up Russia and his brother and his father but doesn't go into the depth of it. But he does allow Shane to comfort him through all of that. And we have these two massive implications that are sitting over their relationship here. Ilya's inability to ever go back to Russia, and Shane and Ilya's careers in the MLH and what kind of bomb their relationship would be to that. And all of that really scary stuff is hanging over them throughout the rest of the conversation and kind of intimate moments that we don't see in this episode. But we do know that in the end, when they exchange names for the second time, and they do so with no panic this time, that they kind of seem to have decided that all of that is worth it. Now, one small nitpicky thing, we do see on the bedside table a bottle of water and a can of ginger ale, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I need to know what hotels they're staying in. Because I travel a lot for work, and every time I look for a ginger ale because my tummy hurts from flying in the hotel minibar, there's never one. Never one can of ginger ale to be found for me. To be fair, my soda of choice is in fact a Coke Zero, but sometimes my tummy hurts from a long international flight, or even just a cross-country one, even a short flight. Flying is not good on the tummy. I'm not saying it's inaccurate, I just want to know what hotel chain they're staying with so that I can start staying there too. 2 weeks after that All-Star game, we have a game in Boston where we see Shane take that risk, head over to Ilya's apartment beforehand, and we also get a moment of Shane sort of understanding how to help Ilya with his emotions to some degree. He starts asking personal questions about his family, about his dad, and we see Ilya get visibly stressed and like clearly not want to deal with it. And we see Shane say, "I'm sorry," but automatically turn it into this joke about beating them that night. And there's something actually quite beautiful about that, about watching them now understanding each other so much better, where moments like this where they would get too close to being personal would be a moment of clamming up, of pushing the other one away, of moving away from this. But instead, Ilya is sort of opening himself up and then saying, enough, I'm stressed. And Shane, instead of pushing like we saw at the Olympics or in Vegas, recognizes that emotional response and changes it to something competitive, something that Ilya can joke about and something that feels comfortable and familiar. So even those little moments where we see Shane sort of lean into their competition to make Ilya comfortable, even that shows this little bit of growth that we're seeing between the two of them. Then in the game itself, we see Ilya get a hat trick and win the game, which if you don't know, a hat trick is 3 goals scored in the same game by the same player. And we know that Ilya gets that because before they head out to the game, he says $1,000 for every goal scored. And when they come back in, he says, "You guys owe me $3,000. So $1,000 per goal scored, 3 goals, $3,000. Ilya is a monster machine. And then of course we see Shane finding out that Ilya didn't go to Nashville from the rumor mill. And again, we have some of that distance where Shane is only able to find out about Ilya through the news, through locker room talk, and through kind of the rumor mill. But the big difference is of course that they ultimately do talk on the phone and that they now have sort of forged a different relationship. But one thing that we see in this Russia sequence is Svetlana by Ilya's side. And while we do see Ilya make this decision to ultimately leave Russia and commit to Shane, one of the other visual things that we do get here is this alternate option that Ilya has. He has Svetlana, who loves him, who's beautiful, who Ilya loves, who knows everything about hockey, who understands his kind of pain when it comes to Russia and his family, and who can be by his side when he goes back to Russia, who defends him, who stands up for him, who understands the intricacies of his relationship. Svetlana is not just this kind of stand-in or beautiful woman that he could be with. Svetlana is a fully formed character who could be a real partner for Ilya, and on paper makes so much more sense, is so much less of a headache, and also is a perfect opportunity for Ilya to run away from what he's doing with Shane here. But in the thick of it all, we see him know that he really wants to be with Shane above all else. Even if it means sacrifice, even if it means leaving his family and his home country, even if it means some stress that comes with hockey. Ilya still wants Shane, even though we visibly see him with an option that would be not only perfectly fine, but probably really nice. And to me, that adds even more to their relationship and the choices that they're making in this episode. It adds even more depth to that phone call that Ilya and Shane have in Russian. We are visually shown that Ilya has another option, someone who does fit into his life really, really well. And not only that, but someone who actually does offer him some of the things that Shane struggles with, an understanding of real familial trauma, an ability to really stand by his side alongside and help him get through those things. A real understanding of who Ilya was when he was younger and how he's changed because of the trauma he's experienced, and who's willing to put up with everything that he has going on with him. In some ways, Svetlana can even offer support that Shane literally can't. And watching Ilya in his darkest moments make a decision to be with Shane, which is much harder than something else that he could do, again challenges that idea that he has about himself when it comes to being lazy. It challenges this idea of him taking the easy way out, of him not necessarily being the best of the best. With Ilya, we truly get a character who will not take half measures for anything, including love. And once he commits to that idea, once he truly accepts it in this moment, we watch him give up on something that could have worked just fine. But Ilya doesn't want just fine, he wants Shane. So a week after Russia and the phone call, of course we have Boston and Montreal playing against each other. We know from the commentary that Montreal is just holding on to a wildcard spot. Now, if you don't follow hockey outside of Heated Rivalry, or this is your first experience with it, the way that the playoffs work is that we have a scoring system that goes throughout the entirety of the season. We operate on a 2-1-0 point system. And what that means is that for every game in the 82 game season, every team receives 2 points for every game they win, whether that's in regulation or in overtime, 1 point for every game that they lose in overtime or a shootout, and 0 points for any game that they lose in regulation. With those points all added up, we then rank all of the teams, but we rank them in 2 different ways. The NHL is broken into 2 different conferences, the Eastern and the Western Conference. There are 16 teams in each of those conferences, and inside each of those conferences are 2 divisions of 8 teams each. When it comes to making the playoffs, the top 3 teams in every division automatically make the playoffs, and that's based off of that ranking based on your score throughout the season. And then we have what's called the wild card. There are 2 wild card spots available in both conferences. However, those wild card spots are not determined just based on your division, but conferences as a whole. So in order to get one of those wild card spots, we remove the 6 teams from the rankings that are making it into the playoffs based off of their division rankings. And then we compare the scores of the rest of the teams left in the conference regardless of division, and the 2 best teams of those rankings move into the wild card position. Once the season's over, whoever is in the top 3 positions in their division or manages to take one of those wild card spots in their conference go into the final bracket for the Stanley Cup playoffs. And the bracket is made within their conference, with the best of the East ultimately playing the best of the West for the Stanley Cup. Which is why when we talk about these teams and the way that the rivalry would work with Boston and Montreal, the fact that they are in the same division means that they are constantly fighting against each other for those rankings, and then they also would never be able to play each other in a Stanley Cup final. They would only either knock each other out of the playoffs based off of rankings like we would be talking about here, or they would potentially play against each other and knock each other out of the playoffs based off of the bracket, or someone else before them might knock them out so that they didn't actually have to meet. But constantly, these teams would be keeping each other out of the Stanley Cup finals in some way or another. So when we hear that the Metros are clinging on to a wild card spot, it means that Boston has had a better season than they have, and that they are on the brink of not making the playoffs. So if Boston beats them tonight, it really could affect their ability to even make it into the playoffs at all. And of course, we also have the voiceover reminding us that Ilya Rozanov is not someone to be counted out, even with the grief of his father passing. This is again a reminder of how unprivate these guys' lives are, where something that is as private and horrible as a parent passing would still be part of your narrative as a player. Can Ilya beat his rival even though he's just lost his father and must be grieving? Or does grief make him a better player, a man possessed? This is constantly how we talk about athletes regardless of their profession or who they're with. Inside of a romance narrative or outside of it, this is pretty real commentary that you would see. People talking about whether or not Ilya would be able to play through something as terrible as the loss of a parent, and whether or not it would make him a better player on the ice. I think, again, there are these little moments that it's important to remember nothing about these guys' lives is private, nothing about these guys' lives ever gets to be personal, and every little thing that happens to them would not only be public, but discussed in the context of whether or not they're good at hockey. And then, of course, we get into the hockey game itself. We have to talk about the check that puts Shane into the hospital, the hockey context behind it, and how down bad it truly tells you Shane is at this point. To really understand the context of this moment, Shane is, again, one of the 2 biggest players in this league. We talk about his hockey IQ being so high and how well he knows this game. So if you're new to hockey, let me catch you up on just a little bit of the basics. The ice in hockey is broken up into 3 zones. Those zones are delineated by the blue lines on the ice that you see. The zone where your team's goal is called their defensive zone. The zone where they're trying to score is called the offensive zone. And the zone in the middle is called the neutral zone. Now, when it comes to the rules of getting hit in hockey, to simplify everything down, you can't just hit people for the fun of it. The person that you're hitting must either have possession of the puck or must reasonably have just had possession of the puck or looked like they were about to get possession of the puck. The goal of hitting this person can't just be because you want to hit them. The intention behind it has to be reasonably separating a person from the puck itself. So Shane has the puck and is well aware of that, and he is skating through the neutral zone into the offensive zone, where the other team is very much going to be aware and playing defensively. The idea that Shane would look behind behind him at Ilya in a lovesick way really should tell you how much his head was not in the game and how focused he was on being in love. This man has to be down bad at this point, because to be one of the greatest hockey players on earth and to have possession of the puck, actively moving into the offensive zone where he definitely is going to get physically hit, and turn and look at the love of his life. I don't need to be sold. This was the moment that I knew they're in love. In all seriousness, the other thing that is kind of relevant here is that when Marlowe hits him, it is a legal hit. And they talk about that. They say it's a clean hit and that Shane just didn't see it coming. And the reason for that is that there actually are rules in hits in hockey. Just like you can't hit someone just for the fun of it, you also have to, in theory, be giving this person enough time to brace themselves for impact. A player can hit you from either side or head on, but they can't hit you kind of between the numbers on the back. They can't hit you from behind. There's a joke there, and I'm gonna leave it there. I'm not gonna make it. The point is that Marlowe hitting Shane the way that he did is completely within the rules of hockey. And Shane looking behind him at Ilya is completely outside of the realm of normalcy when it comes to playing hockey. And so we do get a moment here for the first time where Shane seems visibly distracted on the ice. And I've seen this moment criticized a lot, and the first time I watched it, I was like, okay guys, really? However, I think it also starts to show us kind of the danger of their relationship. And you see Ilya kind of dealing with that as they go back into the hospital room later. For the first time, Shane, who thinks of nothing other than hockey and how to win, is actually distracted by thinking about something else. From the very beginning of this game, before the puck is even dropped, his head is not in this game. He is focused on Ilya coming over later, on his plan to ask him to come to the cottage, and on how much fun he's going to have playing against Ilya and teasing him and goofing around on the ice. In this episode, we go through Shane pretending to be someone that he's not, accepting that he is someone that he wants to be, forcing Ilya to really talk about his feelings and move forward, and then accepting the intimacy of their relationship and the genuineness behind it, and then even getting distracted from the one thing that he doesn't know how to get distracted from, which is hockey. And so it makes sense that when they go to the hospital, you can see Ilya tense with the idea of them continuing their relationship. And you can see him uncertain about moving forward because you can really feel how true this relationship has become. Again, I think the hockey in this show gets criticized by people who aren't willing to sit down and think about how deep the hockey knowledge in this show is and how much it really adds to the relationship across the board. Every little moment, even moments like this where you're like, there's no way Shane would ever be looking behind him. That's the point. The point is that the hockey is so good that they know, of course, Shane would never do this unless he was out of his mind in love. And that's what he is. He's in love with Ilya, and I love it, and I love him. With that hit and Shane crumpled on the ice, we also get Ilya sort of standing Disney-kneed in front of him and asking what's wrong and whether or not he's okay. And we also get the announcer saying not even Rozanov wants to see someone hurt like that. And there are a couple of moments in this sequence where their rivalry for once actually acts as a shield to their true relationship and any suspicion that might have come out of it. Before the game, when Shane's talking to Ilya and exchanging plans for later that evening, when he goes back to talk to Hayden, he's easily able to say like, oh, I was just giving him kind of my condolences, and says that he's still kind of a douchebag, which Hayden immediately accepts. And then of course, when Shane is laid out on the ice, when Ilya is visibly upset and distraught over this, the immediate thought is sportsmanship. Of course, not even rivals of all of these years would have wanted to see each other hurt. It would be mutual respect that is causing him to be so emotional about this. And then when we're in the hospital and Ilya does visit Shane, the nurse doesn't say, oh my god, are you guys in love? She asks if Ilya is going to smother him with a pillow. Again, this is a moment of, hey, this is weird, but it must just be sportsmanlike. These guys have been rivals for so long that of course respect would begin to develop. There's this duality of their rivalry in this moment. Ilya reacts in a strong way that could be seen as someone who cares about Shane, but everyone's brain immediately goes to mutual respect. Their rivalry in this moment provides just as much cover as it does danger. And there's something really smart about that as well. Because if you saw two guys going through an almost decade-long rivalry, one of them gets hurt and the other guy is really distraught about it, is your first thought, oh, those guys might be in love? Or do we see all of these hockey fans and all of these people in this league try to come up with an explanation that makes sense to them? And we even see that when Shane is watching the playoffs with his parents and they watch Ilya lose, where Shane's dad is like, do we not hate him anymore? I'm so confused, I can't keep up with you two. And honestly, at this point, I'm starting to wonder, does this McGill man actually watch hockey? Or does he simply cook for the two people in his life who don't do anything other than watch hockey? But of course, we have Shane's mom saying Ilya visited Shane in the hospital, so now we hate him a little less. Again, even the people who should know Shane the best, nobody's brain is going to, hey, I think those two guys might be in love. As they get more serious and as they start to think about the implications of what their relationship might be if they're in love, their rivalry also starts to provide them cover. And I think that's such a well done shift at the end of this episode here. A shift that is important because as we watch Scott Hunter do something that nobody in the league has ever done before, Ilya has the courage to say that he's coming to the cottage. And we know that that time of privacy is also going to be allowed to be shielded by the way that they interact with each other, which is that no one would ever assume that the two of them would be hanging out. And in these moments where we're seeing them almost give everyone a reason to believe that there's something going on. Ilya kissing Shane's helmet at the All-Star weekend. Shane talking to Ilya ahead of a game in a very normal manner. Ilya being so distraught over Shane's injury on ice. And Ilya even visiting him in the hospital. All of those moments are moments that someone could have said, hey, what is going on here? And instead, Shane and Ilya saw reactions that were, oh, I guess you guys are super sportsmanlike. So I think there's this turn in their rivalry and the hockey context of it. There's so much stress and fear that is mounting in their relationship as they continue to get more serious about each other and feel real feelings. And then there's this version of being in love in hockey and being gay in hockey where you can be Scott Hunter and come out very publicly, and they have a chance to see how that's going to go. But also with all of this going on, they start to realize that no one would ever believe they were together. And maybe that gives them a little bit of cover to kind of explore what that looks like in episode 6 at the cottage. So that takes us through episode 5, which obviously I think had a ton to offer us. I think their relationship has grown in such a way that is so beautiful, and this is actually one of my favorite episodes of the show. Next episode, we will be going through the cottage, which is the very last episode in this series. So I would love to know if you have any questions about this series, of any of the episodes that we've gone through that you want me to break down in episode 6. I will obviously be breaking down the context of it the way I have been doing all this time, but this will be your last chance to ask any specific questions about the TV show. And of course, after episode 6, I will still be doing the rest of the Romance of Sports series. So if you have any other TV shows, films, or books, or any other type of media that you want me to break down, you can also let me know that in the comments, because I will be looking for the next one that we're doing, and we'll announce that at the end of episode 6, which we will drop next week. So for all of that, make sure that you're subscribed, make yourself heard in the comments down below, and I'll see you next week for the cottage breakdown.